Alright, this is it. It's a story that's not just something I heard around a campfire, it's something that happened to me, and I can never forget it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and I'll tell you right now, if you're out in the woods tonight and you feel like you're being watched, or you hear something, just don't ignore it. I didn't. And I still regret it. It was October 2018 when I decided to go camping alone. I've always been the type of person to stray from the beaten path, no big, crowded campsites with RVs and loud music. I wanted solitude, peace. That's why I chose Stony Creek, a remote and isolated area deep within the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania. Stony Creek is a place most people don't know about. It's off the radar, tucked away from the usual hiking trails, and there's no cell service for miles. The nearest ranger station is a good 30-minute drive down winding back roads. It's a place for real adventurers, people who don't mind being cut off from the world. It felt like the perfect place for me to reset. I had planned for weeks, packed all my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food for a few days, water, and my trusty flashlight. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The last slivers of light made the forest look almost magical, the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. I could hear the distant call of a crow, the faint rustle of leaves, the breeze brushing through the branches. Perfect. I checked in at the ranger station where a woman, probably in her late 50s, handed me a map of the area. Her face was weathered, and her voice low, almost like she was speaking in whispers. "Be careful," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "You're heading to Site 34, right?" I nodded, the map crinkling in my hands. "Good site," she continued, her voice dropping even lower. "But don't stay out after dark. People talk about things. Things that shouldn't be here. Keep to the trails. If you hear anything strange, just go back to the site. Don't wander." I chuckled, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Thanks, I'll be fine," I assured her, trying to sound confident. She didn't say anything more, just gave me a long look before turning away. I shook my head as I walked out, feeling like I had just heard an old woman's superstition. But I didn't think much of it at the time. I drove for about 30 minutes, winding down narrow, tree-lined roads until I finally reached Site 34, a spot deep in the woods, surrounded by dense thickets. The campsite was small, but it had a nice, flat patch of ground just big enough for my tent. The fire pit was already there, stone-ringed and well-used. It was the perfect place to be alone with nature. I set up camp quickly, my tent up in no time, and the fire crackling to life. The first few hours were perfect. I made some dinner, roasted a couple of marshmallows, and watched the sunset. The wind was soft, the sky turning pink and purple as the sun slipped below the horizon. By 9 p.m., the woods were dark. I'd seen only a few hikers on the way in, but it was quiet now. No animals, no sounds of other people. Just the crackling of the fire and the rustling of the occasional wind through the trees. It felt like the world was holding its breath. I leaned back on my log, content, letting the warmth of the fire seep into my skin. That's when I first heard it. A faint whisper. It wasn't the wind. It was too soft, too deliberate. "Lucas." I froze, looking around. But I didn't see anything. The fire flickered, casting strange shadows on the ground, and for a moment, I thought I was just hearing things. But then, it came again. Louder, more distinct. "Lucas." I stood up, my heart pounding. My first instinct was to call out, ask if someone was out there, but the woods were too still. No footsteps. No sounds of movement. Just the whisper. The hairs on my neck stood up. I grabbed my flashlight, sweeping it across the trees, but everything was still. The whisper wasn't coming from one place, it seemed to be coming from everywhere. From the shadows in the trees, from the ground, from the very air itself. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be. There was no way anyone was out here, not so deep in the forest, but the longer I stood there, the more uneasy I felt. It was too quiet. Too wrong. I went to sit back down, trying to shake it off. I even laughed at myself, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe just an animal, a bird, something. But then, I saw it, a figure, standing just at the edge of the firelight. It was tall, way too tall. It stood unnaturally straight, almost like it was too stiff to be human. It was standing just beyond the circle of light, far enough to be out of focus, but close enough that I could see it. At first, I thought it was a tree, or a shadow cast by the fire. But then the figure shifted. It wasn't a tree, it was a person. No, not a person. It was wrong. The limbs were too long, too thin, and its skin was pale, almost translucent, like the light of the fire was passing right through it. It didn't have any eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth, featureless skin. But I felt its gaze. I could feel it watching me, my breath caught in my throat. The whispers were louder now, surrounding me from all sides. "Lucas. Come closer." I couldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. I was frozen. It didn't step forward, didn't come closer, but I knew it wanted me to move toward it. I could feel the pressure, like invisible fingers reaching for me. It tilted its head, slowly, almost as if it was studying me. That's when I snapped. I grabbed my pack, my flashlight, everything, and I ran. I don't know how long I ran. I don't know if I even knew where I was going. My flashlight was bouncing wildly in my hands, the beam of light cutting through the trees, illuminating patches of nothingness. The whispers followed me. They grew louder, swirling around me, echoing in my mind. "Lucas. Come back. You don't have to run." I broke through the trees, somehow finding my way back to the main trail. I kept running until I hit the road. By then, the whispers had stopped. The night was silent again. But I didn't stop running. I didn't care if I looked like a fool. I just wanted to get out of there. I jumped in my car, locked the doors, and drove. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The fear had gripped me so tightly. I could still feel its presence. Like it was out there, just waiting for me to stop moving, to slow down. I drove through the night, heading back toward the nearest town. The next day, I went back with a few friends to get my gear. The site was exactly the way I left it. The fire pit still had a few dying embers. My tent was still pitched. But when I looked around, I noticed something strange: footprints. Not normal footprints. They were long, narrow, and too deep to be human. They circled my campsite, getting closer and closer to the tent. But then, they just stopped. There was no sign of anything leading away. Nothing. I packed up quickly and left, and I haven't gone camping alone since. I've never been back to Stony Creek. And I'm telling you, I'm not the only one who's heard the whispers. I met people later who claimed to have experienced the same thing, so, if you ever hear the wind rustling in the trees, or you feel like someone's watching you in the forest, don't ignore it. You might hear your name too. And that's when you'll know it's too late.